okay? I don't know, man. I just felt cold today. Oh, good. We're going to get started whenever you guys are ready. Come on in. Hey. Good evening. Hey, Dorman. Didn't see you sneak in. Good to see you. How's everybody doing? Are we good? All right, we ready to dive into Ezra 3 and 4? I think these are the best two chapters in the book, so hopefully I don't just absolutely massacre them. But I'm pretty excited to share on them tonight. I think they are pivotal for what the Lord's doing in our midst and doing in our community. I'll just start out by saying that I have a measure of the fear of the Lord with talking about this, because restoration is not just corporate, it's also personal. And so I'm going through my own measure of restoration with the Lord, and you are also going through a measure of restoration with the Lord. And anytime you're speaking about someone's personal restoration, you're actually giving language, hopefully, biblical language, to what God is doing in your lives. Because I believe, as Pastor Elvin had said last week, that God is actually calling us deeper. And he's inviting us in. And this is not just about doing old things again. Because, when I hear the words fasting and prayer, and I hear like all of these things, I don't necessarily think innovative and new. I think like the old ancient pathways that have always been around. And so it's like when Pastor Elvin stands up and he's like, I'm calling us all to fast. We're like, again, I've been in that season before. I lost a lot of weight. Not sure I saw a lot of breakthrough though. Or if he's calling us to pray, it's not to just embrace it in the old way. And I want to get into this tonight, because I think one of the things that we have to enter in with a precursor when the Lord begins to talk about restoration, or when he begins to talk about renewal, we can't actually carry those old mindsets about things we're already accustomed to. Does that make sense? Like, you have to understand, these people have hundreds of years of tradition on their side. We have thousands of years of tradition on our side, right? Christian faith, 2,000 years old. These are not new words. They're not new words. When Jesus came and he was like, this only comes out by fasting and prayer, it's not like he was like, they were like, what is fasting and prayer? No, the Pharisees were constantly talking to Jesus and they're like, whoa. Your cats, they're working on the Sabbath. Like, this is, they're not, why don't your disciples fast? Like, this wasn't a new process, but when the Lord starts talking about renewal and he starts inviting us into renewal, it's not so that we can come in with the same mindset that we've always had concerning the same language. It's actually an invitation to begin to think differently about the same language that we already know. Does that make sense? Like, when we're talking about fasting and prayer, we don't immediately nod back to the 90s when IHOP blew up and like the Jesus fast came through and we're all like, I already know exactly everything there is to know about fasting. Prayer, yeah, I've read all the books. Read them all. We're actually inviting, the Lord is inviting us, and as he's inviting us, we're inviting all of you to come with us to begin to think, and just for a moment, and even if you're like, tried that before too, try it again, okay? Because we really do believe that, and this is way, like, we didn't just like, Ezra and Nehemiah, like, God actually told us, like, study these books. They're going to be blueprints for what I'm doing in your midst. And this has always been his plan. I mean, it's just like, as I was reading Ezra and Nehemiah today, or not Nehemiah, but I was reading Ezra 3 and 4, and I even just kept going a little bit and reading into 5 and 6. I couldn't help but get like the words of 1 Peter 2 out of my mind about us being, him being the cornerstone and us being living stones. Like, this isn't about the rebuilding of a physical temple. This is about him turning you into a living stone that can come alongside other living stones to then erect a temple out of human flesh for him to come and dwell. And so Pastor Jason, as a just quick recap, gave us language for just the theme that comes throughout the whole book. Remember, these people are coming from a place of exile because of their own choices. I don't think that can be not mentioned. That their choice to not honor the Lord's Sabbath year, right? Every year, every 7 days we enter into a Sabbath. Every 7th year is a Sabbath year. Talk about trust in the Lord. I can see why, from a human perspective, from my own selfish and mistrusting and lack of faith perspective, why it would be hard for me to not work for an entire year. To let the land rest for an entire year and trust that everything I brought in the 6th year is going to be enough to hold me over for another 365 days. I could see trusting him with 1 day of my week, but trusting him with a whole year is a whole nother level of trust, right? They didn't honor the Lord with the 7th year of Sabbath, and so 70 years of Sabbaths get stored up, and Jeremiah prophesies and says, they're going into exile because I will take my Sabbath years, because they didn't give them to me. And so because of their own decisions, they go into exile. But once the 70 years is up, Pastor Alvin talked to us about how restoration was then signaled by King Cyrus, a pagan king. Yes, I say it like I'm from Wisconsin. Alvin always goes, what'd you say? After I say pagan. Signaled by a pagan king who not only just has a vision from the Lord, not just some profound come to Jesus experience. He then offers a decree that the God of Jerusalem, who dwells in Jerusalem, wants his temple to be rebuilt. And I think there's something really profound about this, because he not only just says, all right, y'all can go. I mean, that would be what I would have done if I was the king. You know, I'm not gonna make it easy for him. I'm not gonna give him of my wealth. That would be stupid, right? But instead, he gives them all the articles of the temple to go back with them. And I think something really profound gets revealed in this. And I actually wrote this down last week when PA was teaching. I said, PA reminded us that God spoke to it through a pagan king to bring about restoration for the nation. And this signifies to us that God is more concerned about our restoration than we are. Yes? Pastor Alvin, sorry, I didn't. I say that, and sometimes people look at me like, PA, what is PA? Yeah, Pastor Alvin. If people say PJ, they mean Pastor Jason. If they say PJ2, they mean me, right? Right, because I'm squared. And then you've got PD for Pastor David or PM for Pastor Michelle. It's pretty common little nicknames we give around the office. You'll see it on paperwork. You'll see it all kinds of stuff. But yeah, PA, when he was speaking, I had this just really profound, just overwhelming, just affection from the Lord and this incredible reminder that I'm actually not in charge of my own restoration. That the Lord is actually more concerned with your restoration than you are. Like, this should fall like a well in the middle of the desert. You want to know why? Because you don't have to keep working now. You get to stop and you get to receive. You get to open your heart. See, the reality is that we're convinced we have to do something, which then closes us off from receiving the restoration of the Lord. And so he takes us to the end of ourselves. Some of us are experiencing that in this season. I know I am. I'm experiencing the end of myself where I'm like, I have tried everything and it's just not working. And he's like, finally, I've been waiting for you to get to the end when you figured it out that you actually can't do this. And so we pick up here in chapter 3. And the nation of people that have been released to go back to the land, they go back, they get themselves settled back in their cities and towns within the nation from where they're from, because it doesn't necessarily mean that they were all from Jerusalem. It's an entire nation that was taken, the nation of Judah. And so they go back, they reestablish their spaces. And then it says, now, when the 7th month came. Anybody know anything about the Jewish calendar? A little bit. 7th month is a really significant month. Most holy days of all of the Jewish feasts fall in the 7th month. I think it's pronounced Tishri. That's where the Feast of Tabernacles, it usually falls right around September for us, if that helps. It's the season where in the first day of the 7th month is Rosh Hashanah, Jewish New Year. 10 days later, you've got Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. That's when the high priest would walk into the temple and he would make sacrifice for himself, the conscious and unconscious sins of himself and the entire nation. And so they wait, and I think something really profound about restoration and the mindset. I'm gonna say this as a precursor because we're gonna get to it. That there's some successes and some failures from the people in their restoration to come back and build the temple. I think it's obvious in some regard that they do it a little bit wrong, since following these two bookend books to the Old Testament, we go into the Dark Ages where God doesn't speak for several hundred years. So it's not like they invoked some beautiful harmony with the Lord, right? They actually go back and they approach it in a way that it's not about receiving a sense of renewal. Like I said, we're not talking about old words. We're not talking about old words in the same way. They actually came and embraced the old patterns in the same way they embraced them prior to exile. So there's a little bit of success that comes in and some strategy that we can learn and some language of rhythms that we can learn about what renewal means when it comes to us. But there's also some things that they failed in. I'll try to point them out as we go. But I think there's 3 themes that really appear in chapter 3 that can be beneficial for us. And that's one, we'll get to it, is sacrifice. The second is worship. And the third, which nobody wants to go through, is emotional healing. Are y'all breathing? Nobody's breathing? Okay, cool. Entered into sacrifice a touch too early. I'm going to read just a couple of verses and then we'll talk about them. It says, "Now in the 7th month came, and the sons of Israel were in the cities. The people gathered together as one man to Jerusalem. Then Jeshua the son of Jozadak and his brothers the priests, and Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and his brothers arose and built the altar of the God of Israel to offer burnt offerings on it, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God." That man Moses, I love the way they talk about that guy. He talked about himself finally, and the nation's like, the man of God. So they set up an altar on its foundation. That's the temple foundation. For they were terrified because of the peoples of the lands, and they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord. Burnt offerings morning and evening. They celebrated the Feast of Booths as it was written, and offered fixed number of burnt offerings daily according to the ordinance as each day required. And afterward there were continual burnt offerings, also for the new moons and for the fixed festivals of the Lord that were consecrated, and from everyone who offered a freewill offering to the Lord. The first thing that I think is kind of obvious in the sense of their restoring of the sacrificial system is that something needs to die. I think that's the obvious part. The question is only you know what needs to die. I can't tell you what needs to die in you. It's speaking about a people that are coming out of the place of exile. They're coming back into restored relationship with the Lord. And the first thing that they seek to establish is the system of sacrifice. I think that speaks volumes to me that in the midst of renewal, there's something that needs to be killed. Maybe it's your expectation of what the Lord's going to do for you. Maybe it's the death of the dream life you always envisioned for yourself. Ugh. Man, hear a pin drop in here tonight. I don't do well with silence, guys. It's the only reason why I bring it up, okay? I'm just being 100% honest with you. I know, I appreciate you listening, but I don't do well with silence. There. Something needs to die. I need somebody to go, oh! Pin drop. You're like, nothing's dying in here tonight. But I think it communicates something really, really beautiful as well about the people. They're beginning to understand that they actually don't need a physical tabernacle to engage the presence of God. They learned in exile, once their tabernacle had been utterly wiped off the face of the earth, that they actually didn't need the tabernacle to engage with God. Yes. Come on, somebody. Thank you. Thank you so much, Cal. Not only did that wake everyone up, it made my heart jump into my head. So good, I forgot my thought. Tabernacle, yes, thank you. Because they rose up, and instead of first going to establish the foundation, they established the altar. And they established the altar in the month when their sin would be dealt with, so that they can enter back into communion with the Lord. I think when we're in the midst of renewal, one of the things that we have to realize is that the ways that it was done before are not necessarily going to be the ways that we do it moving forward. And understand this, that when we move into the place of renewal, that his presence is what leads us, not necessarily a four-walled building. Now, that teaching has created some rogue people. How many know what rogue means? Okay, good. How many have met a rogue person before? What I want to point out about that and just say is that they're not doing sacrifices and following the presence of God all by themselves. They're doing it as a community. It says that they came back to Jerusalem as one man, which means they all decided that this was the way in which they were going to begin the renewal process back from exile. They were going to enter in the 7th month. The month where the most holy days take place, the day in which the month that holds the Day of Atonement, where all of their sin are now forgiven and they can start over from scratch. I think it's awesome because I think you realize that, like, the story of Daniel and the Babylonian in Babylon. He's engaging with the presence of the Lord, and the Lord is communicating him, but yet the temple has been destroyed, the place where God exists. It communicates that God is not just interested in having one location. He's actually interested in having communion and relationship with each and every one of you. Second thing that I think is interesting, I actually didn't really like it at first. I thought it was one of their failures. I was like, I don't know. It says that they do this because they're terrified. And I'm like, yeah, wrong motive. They didn't even do it from faith. And I'm like, that's like all the Lord wants. It's just an offering of faith. But they're literally doing it because they're petrified. And I'm like, that has never worked out well for me. Right? How many people are you like, help! In the middle of something where you're just like, you're terrified. But I read one commentary, and I thought it pointed out something really interesting, and I think this is really, really, really good for us. Is that it actually points out their need and their humanness and their dependence and their need for God. That they actually realized their weakness without him. That they actually realized their vulnerability without him. I'll tell you this, like there's nothing worse, and I've experienced it before. It's literally why I'm up here clinging onto a cross. You guys are laughing. Jason's laughing at me. You want to know why? Because there's nothing worse than being up here and being alone. And I've been up here and been alone. Or felt like I was alone. I've been up here and felt like I was all alone. I cling to it because I actually need him to be up here and talk to you guys and feel confident. I can't do this all by myself. I could. I actually used to. All the time. But it was just a performance. It wasn't real. It wasn't flowing from the deep places in my heart. Because I thought I was superhuman. And I thought that God blessed superhumanity. And I thought God since he gave me all of my gifts, he intended for me to be superhuman. But then I realized that my words didn't actually help bring transformation to you guys. And that's all I want. Gifts apart from him are just good words. And so there's a realization in the midst when God is renewing you that you actually need him to do anything else. That without him, you're just building a table to kill animals on. And you're not actually creating a sweet-smelling aroma onto the Father's nostrils. Praise God is right. Woof. Thank you. See, we're changing Wednesday nights just one shout at a time. Can feel it. It's powerful. I want you to grab a group. You know, it's Wednesday night. Let's jump into a groups, 2 or 3, and answer a question. Actually, a couple of them. First question is, where do you operate out of superhuman strength? Okay. Well, I'll use myself because it's the only thing I can do, since I don't know where Bill is superhuman except for Deacon Prime, except in your haircut. Gotcha. Superhuman strength would be I went to college and learned all about the Bible, and I actually can prepare a beautiful thought process that articulates something very beautiful about who God is. But he's actually not filling my words. And so I would use my gifts, or my talents maybe, as an ability to communicate apart from him. Maybe it's in athletics as well. I still think I'm superhuman on the basketball court some Fridays. I'm not. And I realize that because my old body fails me. And the things I think I can do in my mind, I can't do any longer. So my thinking is where in your are you not depending on God, but yet you're still operating out of your gifting? That's what I would call superhuman strength. The reason why I think we need to know this is because Jason pointed out something really profound in the first when he was talking about exile. And he says exile happens when we try out of our own strength. So if we're going to deal with the areas of exile in us, we actually have to deal with the areas we're not depending on the strength of the Lord. Because we're still operating out of our own strength, which means we're headed towards exile. I don't want to go there anymore. I'm trying to get out of exile. I don't think it's necessarily exile. I preached on it. I think it's just the wilderness. I think we actually have to go there and stay there until we recognize where the source of life actually comes from. And so I've been in the wilderness. I feel like I'm still in the wilderness. And I'm learning about myself and him. He's revealing to me. So my question to you is where are you still operating out of your own strength or your superhumanness? Because you're created like God, which means you are superhuman, which means you are superior to all other creation. But the truth is that we can convince ourselves that we're operating with God when we're actually operating apart from him because we're just operating out of our own strength, right? All right. Is that a clear enough question? Does that help you, Bill? Okay. So jump in with a group. Where are some areas in your life that you are still operating out of your own strength? Yeah, just answer that question. That's a good one. I had another, but two separate. All right. About 30 more seconds and we'll jump back in. All right. Was everybody able to identify and name something? Yeah? She said lots of things. We got to a place, I'm going to say it because I think it's actually good. It's like, well, then how do I know what to do? Right? How do I stop doing it out of my own strength? And I'll just use myself as the example once again. To actually stop doing what I had always been doing, which was being a very, very good performer, I actually had to stop preaching. I actually had to stop doing it. That's good. I like it, though. I appreciate you. No, I appreciate you. I felt the gasp and I got excited. I know, but that's the good thing. It's a conversation we're having. It's not just me talking. That's the point. You actually have to stop doing what you're doing so that you can feel the invitation of the Lord to continue to move forward. That's why he invites us into rest. Because it's from the place of rest that we actually learn how to create with him. And it's the hardest thing on the entire planet to do. I didn't ask the Lord to take me off the preaching schedule. I wasn't like, Lord, help me. I need to die in this area. No, I was actually super insecure. Because I was like, I know I'm a good speaker. Why? Randomly, last year, Alvin just took me off the preaching schedule. Just randomly. And I didn't even bother asking why, because I knew why. Because to hear him say it would be even more embarrassing. So I was just kind of like, shh, bro, I don't know what's going on. I'd go to Jay and be like, dude, did he say something to you? Like, does he think I suck? Does he think I'm a terrible speaker? Like, what is it? And he's like, bro, he has said nothing to me. And I'm like, good Lord, okay. But it was an invitation from the Lord to actually be renewed in an area of my strength. Hear this, it's a gift from the Lord. But unless it's with him, it's only unto my glory. Right? It's only unto my glory. I get the glory. And the Lord said to me just a couple of weeks ago, he said, Jordan, he said, my son came and he refused glory from man so that he could receive glory for eternity. And he said, what do you want? Do you want glory from man? Because where I'm leading you, you're not going to get glory from man. But if you're willing to go without glory now, you'll receive glory for all eternity. And I was like, oh, God, this is going to be so hard. And it is. But you experience a measure of his witness that you've never tasted before when you're willing to stop doing the very thing that you have felt more alive from your entire life. If you're willing to lay that down, I promise you he'll come along. I'm still in the infantile stages where I am trying to learn how to walk. It's why when I get up here, I'm quaking with nerves because I can't just turn it on like I used to be able to do. I get up here and I'm like, talk to me, guys. Talk to me. That's my insecurity speaking because I'm nervous. Because I'm not sure if you guys are with me or if I'm up here going, well, now I've embraced the Lord and now I'm terrible. Thanks. I appreciate that. Moving on. Thank you, Lord. Another thing that takes place within renewal is that he actually renews our worship. He renews the way we interact with him. And it's not just about death, it's actually about life. because in the midst of worship, they're going back to restore the temple, and what we have to understand about worship is that it is not about us. The song they sing is what? In verse 11 it says, and they laid the foundation, and they sang praising and giving thanks to the Lord, saying, for he is good, and his loving kindness is upon Israel. In the Hebrew, it literally says, Yahweh is good, and he is a covenantal God. Meaning, he has knit himself to us, and he is not letting go. We'll let go, but he'll never let go of us. In the midst of renewal, what ends up happening is that we recognize that this is not about our performance, that God is actually who God is, and his goodness is over our lives, whether we're in the most ideal situation or whether we're in exile in Babylon. His nature is that when we come back, when we're in the midst of renewal, we recognize the goodness of God is in every season of our life, not just in our human experience of it. We don't get to dictate what's good and what's bad, which is why he created us without what? The knowledge of good and evil. He knew that if we were the dictators of what was good and what was evil, we would lead our lives away from him. It was like, if I give them the opportunity to lead them, they'll actually not understand what truly is good. It's good for us to enter into refining seasons where things die. But yet my definition of good is not followed by death. That's not in my definition. Not anywhere near my definition. In fact, my definition would be much more probably, hopefully, like your definition. And maybe I'm not the only heathen in here. Yes. But in the midst of worship and in the midst of renewal, we understand who God is. And that is what causes us to enter into the communing relationship with him in worship. I thought somebody was cackling. That threw me. That threw me. And I was like, whoa, hopefully that got recorded. I was like, that's the best cackle I've heard in a long time. I know. I was like, it was like Flipper or something. You wanted noise? But I think the thing that gets revealed, and this is so incredibly powerful because this is the first worship experience that they have. This is the first worship service post-exile. This is what comes out of them coming back from 70 years of feeling obsolete in the earth. God, you are still good. But something that I think is profound for us that we have to recognize is that, listen, the exilic heart isn't changed in one worship service. It's not. And we'll talk about how it's not in chapter 4. Exilic, an exiled heart. So a heart that's separated from God. One worship service doesn't change us and turn us into these incredible communing, imperfect relationship with the Father. Although sometimes that's what we want in the charismatic movement. We think all of our problems get solved in one worship service. Just cast it out of me. I've seen it happen, but I've also seen it not happen. I always say, deliverance from all your issues is like an exception to the rule. It's not the norm. In fact, I used to say, like, well, God set me free in a whole moment. That's not true. It really isn't. My deliverance came because I am a dang good performer, and I just almost cussed. I'm a dang good performer. I watched what was accepted within the church and quickly be able to mimic it and model it. All my issues still were lurking under the surface inside of me because I'm not in charge of my own transformation. He is. But I wanted to be transformed in a moment. Why? Because if I'm not transformed, then I'm not accepted. Right? How many of us have just, as soon as they gave their life to the Lord, it was like you didn't actually study the Bible, you studied Christians. Why? Because if you study a Christian, you actually know how to become one, or so you think. Right? You think every worship leader just got Chelsea boots by the prophecy of the Lord? What? If you don't know what Chelsea boots are, they're those slip-on boots that every Christian worship leader in the whole world has. I got them, and I ain't even a worship leader. I was like, ooh, Christians are wearing Chelsea boots. These are dope. No, we're really good at transforming ourselves to the thing that we know will be accepted and then praised and then put on the platform. Because we want glory for ourselves based on this. We don't want to sit and wait in the trenches of renewal and transformation with the Lord where he makes us new. That's not good enough. I need immediate feedback, just like I do tonight. But something really, really, really profound happens. They go into worship, they lay the foundation. It's so cool. If you, just a small bit of history, they jump into the foundation of the temple in the second month of the year, the exact way Solomon did when he built the temple. So they're actually not looking in the midst of renewal to rebuild this temple in a new way. They're actually doing it in the old way. They're actually mimicking the old pattern. So it's not just an utter success. Even though God breathes on it and things begin to happen that are kingdom oriented, it doesn't mean that these guys were absolutely nailing it out the park. Because they're still going about their restoration in the old model that was shown to them. And they're like, well, we have to make it perfect like it was before. But something gets revealed. They lay the foundation, and it says the young men, yet many of the priests and Levites and the heads of the father's household, the old men who had seen the first temple, wept with a loud voice when the foundation of the house was laid before their eyes, while many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of the shout of joy from the sound of weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud shout, and the sound was heard far away. In the midst of renewal, unprocessed emotion takes place. The grief of 70 years of exile, God begins to do something new, and what comes out? Tears. I believe it's the process by which he's renewing our emotional state to where it's back in a place of a flow with him. Because we can't actually enter into this place of renewal while we still have stopped up grief, where we still have stopped up shame, where we still have stopped up anger, where we still have stopped up guilt, where we still have stopped up hurt. I'm experiencing this on like the most intense level. It is entirely overwhelming. He's doing something new in me, and guess what? I'm processing emotion that I have not yet processed since I was a young boy. Let me just give you a quick example. After my last message, I'm going to cue you into my private life. Is that okay? I'm going to be a little vulnerable, and then hopefully we can understand this. I got off stage, and I was hit with the most heavy level of shame I've ever experienced, at least in current existence. It's been a long time since I remember feeling so much shame. Well, shame means I did something wrong. And I knew it. While I was in the midst of being on stage, there was something that turned, and all of a sudden I felt all by myself up on stage. Okay, this is 2 weeks ago. This isn't like 2 years ago. This is 2 weeks ago. I'm going over to the Peaks house afterwards to celebrate Junie's birthday, because we're secretly trying to orchestrate Ezra and Junie getting married. I'm just messing. Sorta. Listen, we're best friends. What would be better than being father-in-law, right? Okay, cool. Means he can never get away from me. And I'm sitting at his kitchen table, overwhelmed by how much shame I'm feeling. And like, my wife is looking at me like, whoa, buddy, snap out of it. We're trying to have a birthday party here. Jason's looking at me like, hey, what's going on? This is not my usual disposition post-preaching. I don't think it was a bad message, but nobody told me it was a good one either. It's not your fault. It's my fault. And I did something the Lord told me never to do. He told me never to preach the same message twice. And a hunk of that message I had already preached before. And I got off the stage and I didn't know why, because I really felt like I knew what the Lord wanted me to say all week long. I felt like he spoke to me. Oh my gosh, it was so profound. I made a massive assumption about what he wanted me to say. And in the process, I made a fool of myself with him. And he was trying to teach me something by letting me feel all this shame. But want to know what's hilarious? I've been in this group of these guys, and we do these emotional check-ins. And I'm going through this list, and guilt and shame are on the list. Guess what 2 emotions I have never checked in with? Guilt and shame. Because I readily feel like I'm never doing anything wrong. Right? It's not true. I'm superhuman, right? I don't do anything wrong. And fight with my wife? I don't know what your problem is. Doesn't go well. But I never check in with those emotions. And the other guys are always checking in with those emotions. And I'm always like, man, I don't know what they did last night. Whoa. You know, that's how I'm always thinking, because I'm like, woof, man, thank God I'm not in that season anymore. And all of a sudden I'm overwhelmed with shame and I have no idea what's going on. And I'm literally going, Lord, Jay's like, hey man, can you tell me what you're feeling? And I'm like, yeah, I'm feeling shame. And I do not feel shame. And it's really overwhelming. And Jason's like, well, that means you did something wrong. And I go, I just preached a message on the Bible. How could I have done something wrong? I did. I didn't want to say it. In fact, I even knew what I did wrong. Going into it, I'm going to preach the same message, part of the same message twice. I've never done this before. And I experienced an overwhelming sense of shame. And do you want to know what then began to happen? Tuesday came. We have staff meeting Tuesday. And I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm a defensive. I defend people, even when they don't ask me to. You know what I'm talking about, Amber? I defend people even when they don't ask me to. And a said person was coming for another said person who's on our staff, both people on staff. And I immediately jumped up, puffed up my chest, and was like, hey, we're not going to do this. It's not what I said, but that's essentially what I said. And I watched everybody in the room, what I felt, what I was feeling from everyone disconnected. Not just the one person I was trying to push away and tell them to back off. Everybody was like, it was like their lights all went out. And I was like, and you want to know what I felt? Shame. So much shame. And I literally knew exactly what I needed to do. I had to go hunt down Mama Susan. I had to give her a hug, and I had to be like, hey, I am so sorry. I should never have done that to you. And then I had to go back into the rest of the office, and I had to go, hey, guys, I'm learning a lot about myself in this season, and what I just did isn't okay. Because what I feel is telling me that I was not all right. If I ever do that again, can you please cut me off? I might not let you, and I understand that, but please just try, because I don't want to feel like this again. In the midst of renewal, God, when he's doing something new, he doesn't just renew the emotion you already have. He actually unstops all the clogged up ones that have been stopped up for years because you weren't allowed to feel guilt and shame in my family. Because doing something wrong means you did something wrong, and you didn't want to do anything wrong in my family. And so I convinced myself I was always doing something right. So that when I did get punished, I was the one that was right and they were the ones that were wrong, because it helped me disconnect from the pain of feeling punished by my parents. Ooh, sorry, that might have been too much. And so we have to say yes to this part as well, because I believe that emotion is the core way God desires to communicate with us. How many know God doesn't speak English? Like, that's not God's language. He just uses it as a tool because he knows we'll understand it. But when I was a baby, I was still connected to God, but I didn't know English. I still had the ability to connect if I came from him. Do you know what you're born with? 98% of your body developed within your mind, your brainstem. Do you know where that's the core of? Your emotional feeling. Which means you come from God. I believe all babies come from God. They're gifts. That we come from God with our emotive ability entirely connected. You want to know what gets developed last? Your cognitive rational understanding. In fact, for boys, men, it doesn't even happen until your mid to late 20s. Or 60s for Bill. That prefrontal cortex is still ticking for old Bill. So I believe he actually needs this to happen so he can take us back to the original language that we are meant to understand with him. It's not just the tapestry of utilizing language that we've taught ourselves so that we can understand one another. There's a mode of language that comes through the way you feel that actually is another tapestry for the God of the universe to communicate with you. That you can actually feel something and you can know what's going on. I believe that's the way God desires to communicate with all of us. How do you think Jesus walked around this earth and every time he prayed for someone, it said compassion came and that's where healing came? It wasn't say that, and Jesus was observant. He noticed a man with a limp and he thought, my goodness, it must be hard for that man to get around on these dirt streets. No. He felt deeply the need from the person, and because he felt it, he was able to meet it. We will open up an entire healing movement if we can just get emotionally healthy. Chapter 4 is a long chapter, and I'm not going to read any of it. I'm just going to tell you this. There's this group of people that are observing what's going on. They're Assyrians. There's two nations before. You have Judah and you had Israel. And Israel was ransacked by the Assyrians before the Babylonians came and took over the southern kingdom, which is Judah, which is where Jerusalem was. And the Assyrians were nasty people. When they overtook a nation, they didn't kill people. They didn't just kill people. They raped all the women so that they could defile the bloodlines. And they bred out Judaism. They bred out Israeli blood. Rather than just killing them all off, they unpurified them. And you have to understand, according to the law, they're mixed blood, which means they're impure. But guess what never leaves them? Their desire and their love for Yahweh. And so it says that there's a group of people that have watched them and they immediately get labeled as enemies. They're enemies of God because they're not pure. And it says that they came and they said, let us build with you. Like you. They want to be like them. Ugh. God, if somebody came up to me and was like, I want to be like you, I'd be like, yes, come, I will show you the way. And we, like you, seek your God, and we have been sacrificing to him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us up here. They have never stopped or ceased in their worship to Yahweh. And I believe this, I wrote this down because it just struck me so intensely. It says this, I think sometimes we create opposition in the Christian world. We create enemies where people are actually trying to come along with us. And I think our openness to our enemies will dictate the amount of pushback and opposition we face from them. When we keep people out and push them away because they're different from us, we're inviting them to push back and fight against us. And so God can renew us and he can do all of these things, but unless our heart for the outsider and for our quote-unquote enemies actually grows compassionate towards them, this is pointless. I wrote down something else. I don't know if I can find it. Oh, here it is. The Lord said this when I was reading this in chapter 4. He said, a life of prayer and worship that misses a heart for the outsider misses the heart of the one in whom they're praying to. He's not just trying to renew us so that we'll be so powerful. He's not trying to renew us so that we get all of our dreams. He's trying to renew us so that we can become like him in the earth. So that we can actually come together and be a living stone that builds up a temple. And so that when the world looks on a unified bride, they say the Father sent the Son. And so if this is missed, listen, I think we've created so much opposition in the world. It's our own fault that there's whole communities of people that hate us and graffiti our churches with all kinds of craziness. We've created the opposition. That's not persecution. That's a heart that's not after God's. That would rather create separation and win in a political debate rather than actually have a heart for someone who's different than us. I hope I'm not stepping on too many toes. Good, your toes got stepped on? Good. But I really believe this. God is restoring us and he's renewing us, and all we have to do is say yes. We might not like what we have to say yes to. It might be outside of our political paradigms. It might be outside of even things that we've lived our whole life being bent towards. But when he's doing something different, we have to at first admit something needs to die. Something's got to go. It's got to get removed. We've got to kill it so that we can reestablish the communion that Lord always has desired to have with us. We worship not because it gives us the goosebumps and we shake, bake, and quake, but because God's nature is worth pressing into. It's worth discovering. It's worth seeing that when we worship him, we actually see from his perspective. We come alongside of him and we worship him because he's good, not because our lives are so good. Not because they're our dream, picturesque lives. But he's worthy. Because even despite your best efforts to get away from him, he'll never leave you. David realized it. He's like, if I make my bed in hell, behold, you're there. He's like, once you get to this place, you can't get away from him. Once you get to this place of knowing him in the intimacy of his heart, you recognize that there's nowhere you'll go that he can't get you. He can't find you. Shoot, Jonah runs the opposite direction. A big old fish swallows him up and coughs him up on the beaches of his dreams that he didn't want to be on. And you think you can run from God? No. It's his nature. When you make covenant with him, he'll never let you go. And then this. We have to begin to say yes to the things that we're feeling. I know they feel overwhelming. Shoot, I want to numb myself out most nights too. I want to turn on Netflix and just binge watch through The Recruit. You want to know what's funny about The Chosen? I can't binge it. I've tried. Because I'm like, oh, this is good medicine. You know? This is like that holistic cough medicine. You know? It's like, well, I'm still seeing the scriptures. It's like I'm spending time with the Lord. I can't. I watch one episode. I'm so wrecked in my mind. I go to try and watch another one, and the Lord's like, just go to bed, buddy. Tomorrow my mercy is new. And I'm like, oh, that's a good word. Some of us need to not try to numb ourselves out because it carries over into the next day. His mercy is new. Just go to sleep. Just go to sleep. Tomorrow it's another day with him. Don't carry over all that stuff from yesterday. Leave the good in yesterday too. And wake up and say, Lord, I want to experience you afresh and anew. I'm going to open up this book. I've never read it before. I'm going to sing this song. I've never sung this to you. That's entering into his mercy so that we can experience him anew. Let's stand and we'll pray. Jesus, we thank you, we love you, we need you. We just say yes to all that you're doing in our hearts, all that you're doing in our church, in our community, in our midst, Lord. Lord, I ask that you would just continue to just tenderize my heart. It's a line from a song that I've been singing. And it says, I surrender till my heart grows tender. So Lord, we just ask that you would just continue to give us the invitation to surrender to you new every day. That we might enter into your thoughts and into your feelings. That we might have eyes like you and we might have ears to hear. I bless each and every one of us. And I ask you to come, Lord. I bless them in Jesus' name. Amen. Love y'all.